In this video, we'll talk about GDP and economic well-being. Now, most economists, policymakers, social scientists, business persons use a country's real GDP per capita, okay, this measure right here to indicate or to understand the average person's standard of living in that country. So this is used to understand the average person's standard of living in that country. Usually GDP per capita is the main indicator of the average person's standard of living, but it is not a perfect measure of economic well-being. Okay, now the way real GDP per capita is constructed, you can check out a few links that I've posted. This is equal to real GDP divided by a country's population. So if you know what the real GDP is and you know what the population of the country is, you take that ratio and you're going to find out what the average person's income is, because GDP is our national income. Okay, now Senator Robert Kennedy, when he was running for president in 1968, he gave a moving critique of such economic measures such as GDP per capita. He said, GDP does not allow for the health of our children, for the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. It does not include the beauty of our poetry or the strength of our marriages, the intelligence of our public debate, or the integrity of our public officials. It measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. And it can tell us everything about America except why we are proud that we are Americans. So it's a very powerful critique of these measures that are looked at a lot of times, but we shouldn't ignore all of what he's saying. Now, even with all of this critique, why do we still care about GDP? The idea here is that while we know that if the GDP of a country is high, that is going to mean that we or can help us lead a good life. GDP does not measure the health of our children, but we know that GDP, the nations that have a larger GDP can afford better healthcare, right? So a higher GDP can help us in affording better healthcare. Again, GDP does not measure the beauty of our poetry, but nations with a larger GDP can afford to teach or educate more of their citizens to read and enjoy poetry. So a country with a higher GDP can invest more in education. And one of the critiques was GDP does not take into account our intelligence, integrity, courage, wisdom, and devotion to country. But all of these laudable attributes are easier to foster when people are less concerned about being able to afford the material necessities of life. Okay, in short, we're trying to say that GDP does not directly measure those things that makes life worthwhile, but it does measure our ability to obtain the inputs into a worthwhile life. Okay, so let's try to take a look at why GDP is not a perfect measure of well-being, and specifically what is excluded from GDP calculation. So GDP does not account for the quality of the environment. It excludes leisure time that we really value. At least I value that a lot in my work life. The GDP does not include non-market activities like childcare that a parent provides at home, and also about how equitable the distribution of income or wealth is. Okay, but if we look at some of the different types of data in the world, we would find that countries with a higher GDP also enjoy a higher life expectancy. Countries with a higher GDP also have better average schooling, and also countries with a higher GDP have higher overall life satisfaction. Okay, and these are survey reports, but I'll put in a lot of links so you can take a look at very many different measures of standard of living apart from real GDP per capita.